Hi, Celia. Lovely to be with you today and see you for today's interview. So, in a nutshell, could you start by telling us a little bit about your career journey until this point?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I graduated from the University of Houston. I studied finance on sports scholarship. I played a lot of tennis growing up, so I went over to the States and I was in Texas for the 4 years, which was brilliant. Studied finance, like I mentioned, and then always knew I wanted to be in a big city after being in Houston. So I came back to London, started at a boutique consultancy specializing in big data and data science, which was a different background to what I thought I might go into. But 7-8 years later, I'm still all over insights and analytics. So I spent a year there, then had a couple of stints in consulting at PwC and Accenture, always within fintech, financial services, analytics. Then I was at Lloyds Banking Group for a couple of years as a manager, risk and analytics, in data analytics specifically, in group internal audit. And now I'm at Capital Group as insights and analytics lead for Europe and Asia.
Perfect. That's a very exciting journey. Who would you say is your role model and why? Either professional, like a mentor, or personal?
I think as I mentioned, I played tennis. It's got to be Serena Williams for me. Her resilience,
that's a good one.
her desire to be the best, how she overcomes adversity, but also I think there's so much to be learned from her as a person. She's not always been 110% into tennis. She's made it clear that she's got passions outside of tennis, and for me, I think it translates into business, and especially her longevity. I think all of that then speaks to how long she's been going, and she's still close to the top of the game. She's still going for more Grand Slams, and she won her first match, I think her first slam in 99, maybe when I was about 7. So the fact that she's still competing when so many of her peers are retired, definite role model for me.
I mean, she's a force of nature, isn't she?
100%. Her and her sister sometimes gets almost forgotten, but she's also won 7 Grand Slams and been world number 1, and is either 40 or very close to 40 and still going strong. So both of them, big inspiration for me.
Yeah, those are very good role models. So I think I might know the answer to this question, the next question, but what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, a tennis player. Like I said, I played a lot of tennis growing up. I actually got into it. My brother, Cameron, who's older than me, he won 6 free lessons, and I was kind of just sat at the side of the court, and the coach was like, let her come on and play. And my mum was like, no, your brother won the lessons. And the coach was like, no, come on. And actually he stopped playing way before I did. I picked up a racket and loved it from the age of 10 or so. I played internationally as a junior, went as far afield as South Africa, realized that I probably wasn't going to be a pro, and then took the option to go to university instead, on scholarship in the States.
Amazing. That's such an inspirational story as well, because sports and business, just playing both has probably been really fulfilling as well. So what is your biggest career regret and your biggest career achievement?
Regret, I suppose, so long as I'm learning from things, I don't necessarily see them as a regret. I had a big decision to make when I left Lloyds at the end of 2019. I was offered a senior manager role and opted to move to Capital. I don't see it as a regret, but you've got to take calculated risks. I'm quite a risk-averse person. I was quite comfortable at Lloyds, could have stayed there for a while, but chose to kind of change industry almost from commercial banking and retail to the investment management side. And I'm at Capital Group now, and I love it. So that was not a regret. It was a risk that I had to kind of really think through. And then in terms of achievements, I think probably 2 jump out at me. One was being voted for the People's Award when I was at Lloyds, which was voted on by your colleagues, which is someone that's inclusive, of culture, keen to develop the environment and the people that they work with. And I thought that was really nice to be nominated and then voted by people that I work with every day. So that meant a lot. And then I guess the second, I suppose, that's closely tied perhaps with recently being promoted at Capital Group. I joined 2 months before the pandemic hit. I'm working in a brand new team, Insights and Analytics, just showing the power of data and technology and the business value add. And so to then be able to work with my peers who helped me on board so quickly in a pandemic, then moving remotely and still kind of showcase what we're trying to do to get the recognition of a promotion. I think for me that those two are kind of different reasons, but two big achievements for me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's very exciting. In a short sentence, what would you tell your 18-year-old self if they could see you now?
So long as you're learning, you're growing, I think. I definitely had a, how do you get to your dream job? And I don't know what my dream job is. I don't know if I'm in it now. I don't know if it's going to come later. I don't know if it exists yet. And there was kind of the panic of, oh my goodness, where am I going to be when I'm 30? When am I going to be when I'm 40? And now I'm kind of in the mindset of rule out what you don't like, focus on what you do like, work on your strengths, and just keep driving forward.
Good motto to have, actually, to live by. What challenges have you faced, like within a work setting, and how did these challenges differ at each stage of your career? So from like entry level up until now.
Sure. So I think I mentioned my background is in terms of analytics and data science. I studied finance. A lot of my peers, I realized in my first job, were engineering or econometrics or statistics, computer science. So I really had to upskill on some of the principles of data, modeling, the math side of things. I'd done some things in finance, but it was more towards cost modeling and things like that, as opposed to the statistics side. So I spent a lot of time online on DataCamp, on Coursera, just figuring things out. But I think that's one of the brilliant things nowadays is that you can upskill. There's so many courses online. So I really spent a lot of time delving into that as soon as I realized that you need data to solve every single problem. And I love it. I love that side of things. I think getting onto client site, especially being in STEM or being in data, you quickly realize it is quite male dominated. And then when you look at how many people aren't white, especially females, you know, the numbers get even smaller. So it's something, I don't think I've seen it as a problem, but it is something that was really noticeable for me. And it's why I'm quite passionate. I do a lot of mentoring outside of work, letting people know that how great this career path can be, and spending time with particularly young girls or students or people that are new entries to the business world, talking about data, talking about STEM, talking about women in tech. So that was kind of something I noticed early doors. I'm quite vocal about things to do with DE&I, and I think for me that's, unfortunately, I work in pretty progressive companies that want to change and are moving in this space, but you do always have for me that hesitation, like how much do I push for change, what do I speak up about, should I be quiet? And I think if you're not from an underrepresented group, you do have the privilege of just kind of carrying on. You don't necessarily need to focus on kind of what are we doing for gender equality, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, all of that stuff, which are things that I'm really passionate about. And so for some people, I'm like I mentioned, I think I'm one of the fortunate people that works in quite progressive companies, and they want to hear those opinions. They do amplify those voices. But I do know some people speak up, and it's immediate barrier to progression. It means they won't get that promotion. They're seen as troublemakers, and that's always something that I'm quite conscious of. And I do try and get that balance right where I can.
And that's that's very related to the next question that I'm going to ask you. But it's so. Do you think that there are any inclusion-related challenges that are unique to the investment management industry, which you've obviously already touched on in terms of gender and ethnicity as well? But anything else that you'd like to say on that topic?
Yeah,
as well?
I think it's well known when you look at senior leaders in this industry, they're white, male, able-bodied, straight, cis men, typically. That's how it is. And it will take time to change because you need to go way back down the pipeline to start fixing where all the other groups seem to drop off. And I think it starts again with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. That's one of the issues. That's typically the routes that people take in. The socio-economic backgrounds that people come in from into the investment management industry, who's coming from Russell Group, who's coming from Oxbridge, who's coming from Ivy League, and then the people that go to those universities in the first place might not be that diverse. So I think the investment management industry recognizes that there's a long way to go. There's programs now like the Diversity Project, specifically trying to tackle this problem, the 100 Black interns, both of which my company, Capital Group, has signed up to. So I think there's an awareness of it. It needs to change. I think it's quite surprising that it's taken so long to change, and it took the murder of George Floyd to start moving some of these things forward. But progress is being made. I've seen it in the short time that I've been working relative to some people. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a bit of a catalyst for a lot of organizations in terms of the conversations that we've been having this past year. And Celia, how has your lived experience helped you in the industry that you work in today? So in the investment management industry.
Yeah, so like I mentioned previously, I've taken a lot from tennis, resilience, coping with failures, leading teams, working in different cultures, traveling around. But I actually think the biggest experience that shaped my life was being diagnosed with a syndrome called Guillain-Barré, which started as pins and needles when I was out on a client trip when I was working at Accenture, and then essentially left me in a wheelchair. So I was diagnosed with it. Well, they missed it twice in hospital. It's quite rare. I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's pretty low. But it's very serious. 1 in 20 people die. Most people have permanent paralysis or some kind of long-term problems. And so for me, I think going from being basically traveling the world, competing, doing what I loved, then moving to London after university, being fully independent, I had to move back home. I lived with my parents because I wasn't independent. It was the lowest point of my life, I think, but having a strong network around me is something that I realized I lent on. Having good people, having a support system, that resilience, internal belief that you can get through, because sometimes it felt like there really wasn't light at the end of the tunnel, but it's kind of one day at a time is sometimes all you can manage. Because I always had big aspirations where I'm going to be. Like I said, when I moved into working, I was like, what's the dream job? Where are you trying to get to? And that really brought me back to kind of ground zero, square one. You need to learn to walk again, which is what I had to do. I had hours and hours of physio. I was in the water learning how to walk. And I think understanding physical health and mental health, those are aspects as well that I try and talk about more in the workplace. I did like a quick poll with some of my friends. I was like, when was the last time you saw someone in a wheelchair in the office? Things like that, because I was in a wheelchair and I hated it. I hated the fact that people park on curbs and you can't get your car past. Things that should be disability friendly, like the polling stations, actually sometimes have steps. The time taken to cross a road actually isn't long enough to get across in a wheelchair. So things like that. And I think that was visible, but when I was in the wheelchair, but looking at me now, you wouldn't know, because I'm actually back competing. I play for my first and second team at a club in West Hampstead, which I love and it's brilliant. But I always try and have awareness around both the physical side of things, but also the mental side, because I'd gone, like I said, from living as good as life as I wanted, essentially, to actually that being way beyond my control, and how that affects your mindset. I think we just need to, and it's quite relatable to the pandemic. I think to be more aware of how this is impacting people's mental health and well-being, and workplaces are getting better at it. But I do know, again, the investment management industry, financial services, consulting, it is quite almost like a dog-eat-dog world. It's ruthless, essentially. If you want to be successful and you want to get to the top, mental health has a stigma around it, which needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what is one thing you would say leaders can do to help advance inclusion in the investment management world?
I think resourcing DE&I work properly. So it's not just the underrepresented groups or the ERGs or those communities within your firm holding the bulk of the work. I think hire in the appropriate resources, make sure everything is supported. And then I think lastly is to treat it as any other business objective. It shouldn't be a nice to have. It's not optional. It shouldn't be side of desk. Everyone needs to get involved. It starts with the senior leadership and then it trickles down through the company. And I think most senior leaders are pretty good there. Well, not most. Some are. The ones that I've seen, definitely, I would say are on the ball. But then just making sure the message gets passed down and there's accountability for everyone, and you can't opt out and you can't decide, I don't really fancy doing this. It should be like any other business objective, performance objective, and taken seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, actually. We often reflect reflect on how you can't be what you can't see. How far does that resonate with you and your experiences in business?
So I always think someone's got to be the first. So for me, it's almost a challenge. I was like, someone's got to get there. There's always the first in the room at that level in the company. And so why can't it be me or someone similar? So I don't see it as an obstacle. It's more of a motivation. But I do think it's fundamentally important to have that representation amongst senior leaders, amongst the decision makers. For reasons that I spoke about before, I wouldn't be aware of the problems that wheelchair users face had I not been in one. You can try and learn, but you're never in that situation until you're actually living it. And so I think we've got to take into account, there's some things that you can see, like I can show up to work and people know I'm a Black woman. I was disabled previously. I also identify as bisexual. There's some things that people can see and assume. There's some things that people can't. And I think making sure that you've got vocal senior leaders, making sure that associates of all levels, of all demographics, understand that someone is speaking on their behalf. And if there's not someone senior at that level yet, you then need to bring those people into the room, into those conversations, to make sure your DE&I strategies are inclusive. When we're talking about ESG, we're talking about the right things. And just from kind of even like moving back into work, like working from home versus traveling to work, making sure we're including the conversation for the people that can afford to live in central London, the people that are further afield, the people with kids, the people with caring responsibilities, all of that needs to be represented. So even if you can't see it, doesn't mean you can't be it, but in terms of inclusive conversations and making sure different facets and everything is taken into account, that's where I think being seen or being heard is the most important.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Celia. It was incredibly interesting to actually have this conversation with you, kick off the day like that. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Great to chat, and thanks for having me.
Passion. Absolutely.